Good on the camera. Since I hate not being punctual, I think we'll make a compromise with Dan and start like 4 minutes late. Just by way of quick introduction, and thank you all for making our panel discussion this morning. My name is Mike Newman. I'm currently the president at a company called Media Platform, although I've been in the space for probably 15 years. Formerly, I was a founder of a company called Accordant Technologies, did a little stint at Polycom, peripheral to the streaming space, and for last year, I've been at Media Platform, where we're very focused on YouTube for the enterprise and large live webcasts for corporate communications. Now, having known at least a few of these panelists for a very long time and gotten to know the remaining two over the last couple of weeks, I can tell you I kind of feel like I won the lottery. I'm not going to have to do a lot today. Tremendous experience, and we're going to get to that in a minute. To their credit, what they wanted to know was who's watching today, who's in attendance, and asked me to poll the audience very quickly so that they can shape their comments and their observations to best fit your current situation. So really quickly, by way of show of hands, how many people are currently involved in enterprise communications? All right, and for those of you that are, what percent or how many of you are as business users? Okay, and then how many are on the technology side and making technology buying decisions? Fantastic. And then really quickly, vendors, integrators. Great. And then lastly, because we're going to have some good representation on sort of the media and entertainment side today, are any of you looking at OVPs and sort of much more externally facing content? Boom.
That's good.
Good mix.
Yeah.
All right, well with that, since I probably can't do justice to their backgrounds, I'm going to go down the line and start with Nico. Do you mind introducing yourself?
I do not. I think I know a few people in this room. Thank you for coming today. I think it means a lot. I've been in the streaming space, God, I thought about it today and what I was going to say for 20 years. In 1996, a little company that we came to know as Real Networks started doing experiments in streaming media, and here I am still doing it today. So that's pretty incredible. Throughout those 20 years, I've worked on large and small deployments across many enterprise and consumer facing platforms. And today, I'm still plugging away at it, and I hope that we can bring some insight and value for any of you making decisions or currently using it or trying to deploy a solution today.
Thanks, Nico. Charles?
Cool. My name is Charles Trulson. I'm an engineer at Condé Nast Entertainment. We built an end-to-end solution from ingestion to distribution for all the brands at Condé Nast. And if anyone has any questions about that after the panel, I'm open to that.
Thank you. Joe?
How you doing? My name is Joe Arena. I'm Vice President over at Youre, and we are a managed services provider. So we are a technology agnostic provider of services. So we'll come in, listen to requirements, help build requirements, design a solution for you, and then run it long term. So we work with very large enterprise customers and the federal government. And I got to know Mike, 5-7 years ago when I was at Merck and ran webcasting there, and he was head of Accordant.
Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Eric Hoffman. I'm the Vice President from East Bank Technologies. I've been in the technology space about 20 years. I have both business and engineering backgrounds. I did a long stint at Microsoft where I worked exclusively with media and entertainment industry around media solutions and streaming. How many of you remember back in the days of smooth streaming when that first came out? That was like the bee's knees, and it's been very interesting to watch the evolution of the industry over the last 10 years. Now I'm, similar to Joe, I'm in a technology agnostic company. We work with big and small, both state and local and enterprise-based customers around delivering media solutions, whether that's ingestion, whether that's storage, whether that's scalability. It runs the gamut. I'm looking forward to a very lively discussion with all of you today, and I hope that we learn something too as panelists coming out of the room today. That's what's fun in it for us.
Thanks, Eric. So really quickly, like many things in our industry, there's a little bit of ambiguity around the term EVP or Enterprise Video Platform. And so I thought it might be worthwhile just starting with defining the space. And you can go to the analysts and how they define the enterprise video platform space, and not to oversimplify, but it really breaks down in their minds to creation, management, the portal environment, administration, delivery, and then now a sort of recent evolution has been pending reporting to that and analytics. So that's probably the oversimplified version of the space. And Nico, who's studied the space, let me see if
Arrow.
I did.
The right arrow.
I did.
That you didn't.
The other arrow.
So I'm here for support.
We're a team.
We're a team.
So really quickly, I thought this was a phenomenal slide, and it's a tiny bit of an eye chart, but when you dig down into it, every piece of information on this is worthwhile in studying, what we're talking about today. Are you going to be deploying as a SaaS? Are there going to be components of an EVP that are going to be hybrid? Are you going to go exclusively on-prem? And we're going to get into a lot of the quantitative and qualitative reasons for making those decisions. Really quickly, Nico, you
Sure, I'll
came
go
up
through
with the
that.
slide. Do you mind really quickly?
Over the course of the last 20 years, I think I've rewritten this slide 1,000 different ways, added a lot to it over the years because things have been broken up. Instead of a one-stop shop for the enterprise, we have to look at each layer sort of as a business unit or a business source. So when looking at this, I have a lot of ITIL training, so I always break things down into network layers. In my mind, this is what it kind of looks like. On the source layer, that could be pretty much, you have your vendor space there, that's your products, that's what you're gonna get your video acquisition from. So whether you're getting it over satellite or you have something pre-recorded, whatever, that will be your source layer. So for Condé Nast, they have a lot of different means by which to acquire sources, but we're looking at live and on-demand solution, things that come off your mobile device. And then getting more into it, the capture devices where you'll see, start seeing your SaaS solutions come into play. And I think that's the expectation a lot these days, is that people want to be able to capture content through any kind of interface. That's where we start evaluating products. And then breaking it down, the authentication layer, for me, is a tricky one when you're looking at the enterprise, because that's not just, access control. That'll also have a lot to do with compliance, and it'll also have a lot to do with how a business runs their compliance and authentication. So in the enterprise space, you'll see a lot of LDAP integration, which a lot of the products I've looked at over the years have always had issues with, and that'll be interesting to look at. Content management, that's your live and on-demand distribution. However you look at it, in my mind, whatever solution you get in the enterprise is really going to be a hybrid composed of whatever solutions fit in each layer that we've outlined on this slide. So at least that's how I look at it when going in and just starting the plan. And in an enterprise deployment, we kind of look at who is the subject matter expert in each area at the enterprise you're going to. One person, keep it small, and who's going to make decisions that you can live with and actually deploy a solution. So that was what this slide was based on. It'll.
So not to put Eric or Joe on the spot,
Sure.
but that was fantastic, Nico. Is there any nuance or anything you'd supplement the slide with before we move into the actual sort of decision-making process?
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is a great overview. It captures the large buckets of what you have to have in an enterprise video platform. But I would say that, some of the pain points that I've heard over the last 15, 20 years are kind of threaded in between some of these things. Like, how does the best way for me to capture revenue? What's the most efficient way for me to capture revenue? And there's all different schemas that I've worked with, that we've all worked with different partners on how to do that. Some of those involve new infrastructure, some of those involve new processes, some of those involve new technologies. So I'd say that's a big consideration for your best practices around how you make an enterprise video platform. The other thing that I keep hearing more and more of, even for folks that didn't have the issue 5, 10 years ago, is around DRM efficiencies. Like, this is getting very costly. Our consumption keeps going up. The amount of people that want our content continues to rise. How do I come up with a more cost-effective solution? So I keep hearing, Okay, what's a FOSS solution? I want a free off-the-shelf solution. I'm tired of paying these DRM rights. It's 2 cents a copy. Now our DRM, it's slowly creeping up every year. So I would add that in as a thought and a good discussion for the panel for all of us today. And I think, last but not least is, how this fits in with what you currently have. I think that's a big consideration because the majority of you that already are in the business of some sort of video content, you already have a system that you can't just throw away. You have to bolt things on in a cost-effective way that's going to allow you to scale. So I would add those 3 things.
Joe, Charles, anything?
Yeah, I mean, so what I typically see, content, what's labeled as content distribution, the streaming, the network side, right? Paying attention to the ability to stream efficiently across your internal network. So we're talking inside the firewall, right? Outside the firewall is a lot easier. You go to an Akamai or something like that. But inside the firewall, if you're going to make a cloud decision, streaming live content is a space where you really need to pay a lot of attention. Your network folks have to be involved. If your network is multicast enabled in some locations, but not multicast enabled in other locations, it's a nightmare. I go to clients all the time. I was just at one on Friday, and it started off as a homegrown system. One guy trying to build up this thing with a little bit of money, and he just can't manage it. The company's starting to grow, right? So you really have to take a look at that content distribution layer. If you want to stream to hundreds or thousands of people at the same time, live is very different, So you have to take a look at that. The other thing that the content sources, right? In my world, I come across Skype for Business every day. As a source, everybody is now doing two-way video on Skype. They're integrating into their video conferencing platform, and they want that as a source for streaming content, doing town halls. People, they want to be a source originator in different parts of the globe. Maybe they're going to do a global town hall, and the head of research is in China and wants to do it from his hotel room. How does that happen, right? How can we leverage Skype for Business? Can we integrate it? That's a question that I keep hearing about. So looking at the sources is very, very big for me.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
I would say from an engineering perspective, if you're thinking about doing this in-house or outsourcing it to a third party, if you do it in-house, which we do, most of it, there's engineer knowledge at every step of these layers, So it's an investment from the business and trusting their engineers with this knowledge and sourcing good talent. So, and from the engineer side too, they have to invest time into knowing the space and knowing each layer in depth. So just keep that in mind.
I was just going to add to that, if that's okay.
That is, you fixed my computer.
So looking back at everything everybody said, one of the points I wanted to make are, since we're looking at SaaS models, and like I said in my mind earlier, everything is going to be a hybrid. We were talking a little bit earlier about cloud applications, SaaS applications that live outside the enterprise. And really what we want to do is have the flexibility or the option of bringing those solutions internally. And most enterprises have layers like this, and they will have something that's like a middleware area, where if you are bringing in a product like that, you want to see if you have the resources internally to take a solution and build it as your own internal SaaS service, right? So putting in your own cloud systems anywhere, whether it's content distribution or on the publishing side. That's a tricky situation. I've worked as an engineer and an architect and a project manager and a risk analyst. At times, we wind up wearing a lot of hats in this area. So I think that will be something interesting to look at. And as the engineer, we're the ones who usually have to own the solution and figure out how to make it work in a way where everybody will agree it's not a risk. So, that I wanted to just throw in there.
So I don't think I promised I'd leave the audience alone. I do have a quick question or poll for the audience based on Joe's comments, a little bit out of my own self-interest. How many of you are looking at Skype for Business currently as a source for webcasting, corporate communications, and one-to-many communications? Are you towards the front end of those analyses, or are you rolled out and integrated into webcasting products? So we're on the front end. I think the conventional wisdom probably won't hold up this time, which is, Microsoft's going to be 2-3 years before having a product that really can lend itself. I think they seem to be a little bit ahead of schedule from my perspective. I mean, Joe, I don't know, Eric, you guys seeing the same thing?
Well, the product keeps getting better. That's the
Yeah.
good news. But I think you alluded to the thing that people are maybe a little tentative to say, it's just not getting better fast enough. And I think that in the time before it's what we call acceptable for pure enterprise play, there's going to need to be enhancements made to it to bridge the gap. I think it's probably going to be 6 to 18 months, probably more like 18 months before we see Skype really being where it needs to be based on sort of the tea leaves that I'm reading. So in the interim, if that's a product you want to play with and you need it from a business perspective, then you're going to have to look at doing something on the custom side for the next 6 to 18 months.
Yeah, and I would say if you go to the Microsoft conferences, there's streaming, there's large streaming sections, and they will tell you that it's great, and it's going to come a long way. It already has, but still at the same time you have to look at that content distribution layer, that network layer, because it's people there. What it does seem to have a lot of top management support because. It's being implemented for phone systems now, and they're looking at it as video systems. So now, what else can it do? Can it do webcasting too? It potentially can, but it's certainly not it's not an EVP, right?
Yeah,
So.
not yet.
I think about that link and Skype model for capturing video, and in my mind, just from day to day, content quality, I don't see a strong case for it being a necessity. So I hear the business, they would like it. But if it's really a matter of like compliance or archiving content for some kind of compliance review, I would see why they need the video aspect of it. If you want to do streaming for e-learning, there's so many other options out there than trying to make communications to a like Link or Skype be a platform for streaming too. I don't trust a lot of people just to send an email. I don't know that I trust them to sit in front of a computer, all unshaven, talking to clients, streaming to the world. That to me doesn't seem like a valuable delivery mechanism. But
All right.
that's my 2
Thank
cents
you,
there.
So when we met up to prepare for this, I asked some very broad questions. What were you looking for? What were your requirements? What were your key considerations? And I think almost uniformly, some things percolated up to the top, and I think business case was one of the key drivers. I can't remember who was most emphatic about that. Was it you, Joe, or Eric?
Yeah, based on probably my past life in the pharmaceutical industry. Yeah,
Can you just give some context on that? Because I think what I'd love to be able to provide today are the different lenses through which you can kind of look at this analysis, and some are going to be more important, whether it's the financial modeling, whether it's time to market, but what were your experiences, maybe for those of you that work with multiple customers? Yeah. You have a broader array, and certainly Charles, you have a perspective on this. So why don't we, from Eric on down, go down the line?
Sure. Yeah. So from a business case, one of the things that what I've seen, especially in media and entertainment, even to a certain extent, not even media and entertainment, I think it's more ubiquitous in that, is that there's always a need to make yourself have the most added value in your space. And in terms of that, then what that means is that that people are always evaluating efficiencies for how we can get content out. They have to meet the needs of the increased consumption, because that's something I'm also seeing across the board. Whether you're a news media outlet or you're a third-party source, doesn't really matter. The business case is there. Video consumption continues to go up. We see that it's going up on a proliferation of all the devices that are out there. So the business case, if you're in business to make money, whether it's from eyeballs, it's advertising, or whether it's from sort of a paid premium service, the business case is going to be there. And the interesting part that I'm starting to see for the business case that's ubiquitous, I think, across the industry right now, is that a way that you implement the systems and how you can achieve the best efficiencies are going to drive how you answer the business cases. Whether you're a news operation and you have to be one of the first ones to get content out, because if not, then you're going to get scooped by somebody else, or you have a premium service where you offer music or video. You need the business case. To me, it's always been there, but it's again more complicated because the competition is even higher than it was, say, even 4 or 5 years ago. So I think when you take a look at all the factors, the business case is probably number one that's going to drive all the implications here, because if you look at that, that business case is going to drive, how do I get rid of my legacy systems? Do I keep the legacy systems? It's also going to drive how much money you put into it and how you get to market. Are we going to make money on that, or is it going to be investment we're not going to recoup for the next 3 or 4 years? Do I have security holes that I need to patch? I think the one that's sort of the uber case for all of these things is your business case, and all the other 4 or 5 considerations fall underneath of that. And I think that's pretty ubiquitous no matter what industry you're in right now.
So what I would say, typically from a requirements perspective, the uber requirement that I hear is senior management messaging down to the organization, right? How do we, working with the corporate communications function, they tend to be the customers of the IT organization that's building this. Sometimes they've gone to third parties and they'll bring in a production crew, and then they've gotten to the point where they really want to be able to expand that service down from maybe a subset of events a year to the entire organization, really sharing that message and getting that corporate message out. That seems to be a requirement that I see a lot, right? So once that's defined, then you can kind of detail that out a little bit further to kind of outline that previous slide, right? And create the IT project and then create the support model behind it, right? And all of those other items will fall in place.
So for us, I think the main goal was customization. We wanted a customized player, and there was an open source platform at the time that we decided to use. And we kind of built it upon that. So we had to also build a CMS for the brands to upload videos to. And we decided to use AWS for most of our services because the engineers that were hired knew that space really well. So that's basically the requirement. We had about 6 months to build a player, a CMS, and we did it. We did one from November 12 to March 2013. We built video.glamour.com. That was our first project, and it had a customized player in it as well. Oh, and also we had to build a portal for the videos to be consumed. So there were 3 main components to that. And the engineers that were brought on knew AWS really well, so that was the reason we chose that.
I like to keep it really simple and pragmatic. You can pretty much deliver anything that the business requirements can lay down, but if you just keep it at its most basic form, you look at your budget and your timeline, and that equals the level of effort. So more often than not, especially for more, for timelines that are really short and you don't have a lot of budget, you need less people involved, and they're only going to get a certain number of their expectations met. So going back from there, the larger budget, a larger timeline, then you can have more of those wonderful requirements met. But that's really all it boils down to, right? So whether you're going to use something that already exists out of the box, or if you're going to build something custom, or if it has to be something custom, who's going to build it, who's going to manage it? If it has a short lifeline, then you can make more rash decisions. In some instances, you have to be a little bit of a renegade, especially in the engineering space. Somebody wants a one-off. They have a small budget. They want it done in 3 weeks. Then that's what you get. If you want something that's going to have a shelf life, and we thought a 3-year shelf life these days for any kind of deployment was a good shelf life, and then you have a very different, then you go back and you look at the business requirements and start breaking it out like a real project. But yeah, that's a simple equation.
So the panel's had a pretty wide array of experience. I'm just wondering, it sounds like we talked about the norm and the business case driving decision making, kind of the framework for the entire analysis. Are there exceptions to that? I mean, are you seeing financial services, pharma? Are there industries, sub-verticals where security might be dispositive, maybe even a misperception of the security risks? OpEx versus CapEx. That's the one anecdotally we hear a lot. I don't know if it was ever the actual decision driver, but I mean, just anecdotally, can you throw out some other considerations or areas where it could be dispositive?
Yeah, sure. So one of the areas that I've seen with a partner we work with is, years ago, they amalgamated content from a lot of different news sources, and they got content from this source, they got content from that source. What's happened over the last 5 years is that their capturing of that content, the the way that they do that and the rules for which they acquire that content have gotten more and more strict and more financially disadvantageous. So they only have a certain amount of time where they actually own the content before they get charged a hefty additional revenue fee on top of that. So that's actually a consideration that they didn't even think of 5 years ago. So now they have this content now, they can only have this for 20 minutes or else we're going to get this enormous bill from XYZ provider. So they have to be able to get that content in, get it out, and then expunge it from their content management systems within a very short amount of time, or else they're going to get hit with a nasty little revenue charge from their strategic partners. Stuff like that happens in the industry that they didn't even foresee. So I would say always think about the what ifs and always be a little bit paranoid, but don't just jump into the fire with ripping everything out and putting it into the cloud, because while that may seem like a short-term fix, there are implications to that. So just be careful with that, because I've seen folks do that and they end up coming back and have to redo things. But I would say those things that you didn't think about are the ones that, those are sort of in between the lines here. Those are the ones you really got to be careful about and be flexible with and unforeseen things that can happen.
Joe?
Yeah, so I would say if we talk about some of the verticals, some of the experience that I've seen, pharma generally wants to do it in the cloud, but it has to obviously be secure, right? So security is very, very, very big focus area. A lot of customers also want an expense-based model, right? Just don't want to be in the IT business anymore, is something that I heard last week in New York City. I just want to have an expense line item. Just tell me what and it's going to work, right? The financial industry, of course, is highly secured, so they tend to not do it outside the firewall. We're going to do it customer premise and manage everything on-prem. Federal government, believe it or not, has always been customer prem, but believe it or not, now with FedRAMP certified data centers, are looking at putting stuff in the cloud for the first time, which is very interesting, allowing some remote access. Yeah, so security is a focus on all of them, though.
Charles, anything you want to add, or Nico?
No, I have nothing.
All right.
Oh, we were talking earlier also about what it means to throw stuff in the cloud, and when you're, depending on how technical you are and you break it down, the cloud itself is a word that's overused, and you can put a cloud inside the firewall, you can have a cloud outside the firewall, you can have a managed cloud and a secure data center outside the firewall. So, I get very aggravated by the overuse of the word cloud. I mean, you can throw a few VMs up and throw some clever software on there, but in the long run, I think where a lot of the solutions break down is when you start testing it, and you start load testing and quality assurance testing, and then you start having to fix stuff, and that's that's the sort of the phase 2 after pilot. But I just wanted to comment on that since we're focusing on an enterprise solution today.
Well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but when we were talking earlier, I mean, I think there was general agreement that hybrid is probably almost a necessity if you're doing any type of internal distribution.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just
Especially when you look at the other slide and everything is broken down, it's not going to be one entity that owns every aspect of the service. So once you start having your own internal little cloud, who's going to run that little cloud? Is it going to be you running the cloud? If it's touching your network, like I've worked for a lot of transatlantic global enterprises, and it always started out where they just wanted this big bang and they had this big budget behind it. But then when the reality broke, none of these enterprises are actually one network. That we've looked at. I was at JP Morgan Chase for 7 years. It was not one network. So you're going to have a hybrid solution because you have to make it work across all these little pockets of distribution, and sometimes the throughput on the fiber isn't what they say it is, and if you outsource that kind of stuff, reality starts setting in. So I'm more into a phased, realistic approach, going back to budget and timeline, level of expectation. That's the effort that they're going to get, and you have to really be realistic, have a 360 view about the whole enterprise environment, and start from the beginning thinking about all those different aspects, because some of that's going to get cut out when you do your initial analysis, right? You're going to have to do some stuff and be creative and be a renegade and work around it. But yeah,
what I might add to that is keep it simple, right? When the clients, whoever your stakeholders are, starting this thing and say, I want to be able to stream a town hall, and I want it to go to 20,000 people, and I want it to be broadcast quality. Wait, what was that? Broadcast quality? What are we talking about? I want HD. Well, slow down, because when it's kind of like disaster recovery for those of you in the IT field, right? Class A is different than everything else. It's expensive. So broadcast quality is expensive on so many layers. So when I was at Merck, we were streaming at 100K, 100K, 400K, getting to 200K or 300K was, for the network guy, gave him so many headaches, just told us to go away. And what does that do to your storage? Because then you're magnifying your storage, right? And when you have a content delivery network, what does it do to that? So creating that project and looking at all those layers is so important, and then keeping it simple, right? Well, maybe we start at a small stream a small stream. Let's see there, because then you have sites that don't have as much bandwidth. Gosh, there's, in global organizations, there's sites that have 2 meg going to these sites, and you have all your production traffic, and maybe you have Skype for Business now running on that, and you have enterprise voice on Skype for Business, and you have to have your quality of service set up on your network. So there's a lot of elements to it. So keeping that customer in a realistic space is going to drastically change your financial implications.
I would add to what Joe said. One of the a couple customers I've worked with, it's interesting some of the issues you run into, and there's a thing that's not on there. I think there's a human factor that goes into this too, because everybody that's that's in business, especially some of our overzealous owners and CEOs, they often come down and they put a lot of pressure on their VPs of IT, and they say, look, I want everything in the cloud because I just saw this article and it says that if I have stuff on premise, that I'm wasting resources, and I have engineers doing this and doing that. So protect yourself, and what we've done with some partners we work with is that help them with the analysis. So have your analysis prepared prior to that conversation happening, because if you don't have that analysis done and that conversation happens, you're going to be very hot and bothered, and it's not going to be a good day for you. So I would say resist the urge to force the conversation, but have the analysis done. And as Joe and Nico had indicated, there's going to be bits and pieces where you can save licensing costs. This stuff's on-prem, it's costing us. We're paying all this money for this on-prem SQL license. We're paying money for all these licenses for servers, and then we got to maintain them. When there's an upgrade to Active Directory, we got to go through that. I just went through a huge headache with a partner where people couldn't log in because they waited too long in order to do that. If you can eliminate those things, get those in the cloud. You don't need to be wasting your time on it. Focus on your core business. But you got to have that analysis done first, because if you don't, then what's going to happen is you're going to be in a fire drill, and we've all been there and knows. So I would say that's another huge factor on here that I would strongly advise folks to consider and be proactive.
I think it's a great point. It actually segues into the next series of questions, which, in thinking about how we hope to be of value today, we kind of agreed maybe it'd be valuable to encourage you to question conventional wisdom. And I think we looked at ourselves and said, where were we potentially misled by conventional wisdom? Where was perception different from reality? And I think when it comes to a SaaS deployment versus an on-prem, there are assumptions, and sometimes they can cloud the way you look at the analysis itself. That was not intended.
No pun intended.
No, it's not my style. So before we get into the question and answer part, we'll save time for that. We just wanted to go reality versus conventional wisdom. 4 main topics was the SaaS deployment easier or more complex than you anticipated? I mean, were there resource requirements that you underestimated? I think when I hear SaaS, it's cheaper, more flexible, easier to deploy, keep your hands clean. And I know, having been in business, that's not always the case. So, well, maybe it is for you, Charles, because you're OVP, your hands are clean.
Yeah.
Why don't we start with you, Nico? I mean, just if you were to look at maybe assumptions you have made or what your expectations were looking at certain types of solutions. I know that.
So I'm very much a try engineer, and I think that's where the reality starts dawning on me, where before I even like to make a recommendation to a client, I want to try the product. I want to see what it takes to install it somewhere. I want to be able to do a proof of concept, which in reality, it's easier if you have a friend who's a sales engineer at some SaaS company, and they just give you an account. You can go in there and poke around and say, oh, we'll break that, that'll break, that'll break. But I mean, in terms of the reality of getting something into the enterprise, that's when you have to start being realistic and break it down. And going back to that, budget and the timeline, then you can figure out what the level of effort to bring it in internally would be. So like we said before, I mentioned before that I'm a big fan of a phased approach to things where you can bring something in and pilot it, and you're going to have, it would be great if you could just bring stuff from the outside in. And there's some deployments that I've done which were really tricky where it lived outside, but in the configuration aspect of it, we were pointing to internal resources to see if it would work. And a lot of cases it does, and that's really interesting as an engineer. But then you bring that to risk and they say, well, this information is being stored somewhere that's external, and then you start looking and breaking down what the security behind the SaaS solution is. And again, that's where stuff starts falling apart for me for enterprise deployments. So, I'm big for the hybrid, big for bringing SaaS inside, but really, really reluctant to do anything that requires any customization. I expect things to work out of the box. And I think that we were talking about that earlier. I think the biggest problem for any client when you start giving them the flexibility or the license to dictate how the product should work, and then the company will make customizations. And we were talking about how that's going to live through the development cycle or the life cycle of the product within your enterprise. So that's huge for me. And then if they do make those customizations, what guarantee do you have that when you go and upgrade your platform, when the SaaS upgrades itself and they don't even tell you, which has happened, and then stuff breaks, even if something as little as branding, where I've seen where the company would go and make an update, and all the little customizations you did for branding are broken, and suddenly you have the vendor's logo all over the place, and you have a consumer-facing product. I think some of us in this room have seen that. But you take that to a larger scale. So, bring it in-house, have it managed, don't do things out of the box, customization, unless you have a core engineering team that has documented everything and talk to each other and aren't leaving. High turnover, I think, is a big service delivery killer for these solutions.
Yeah, I agree. So when we built the player, we were pretty fast. I mean, we built it among 2 other products too, CMS and a portal to consume the videos. But so like you said, we were kind of renegades in that aspect. But with that, when you're doing that and you're building this thing really fast, you're acquiring technical debt at that point. And if you don't invest early in like squashing that debt and adding documentation and making it easy to onboard and make it easy to understand the player, that's the main thing that we work on. It's gonna keep growing, right? So the business needs to understand that too. That every little thing that they ask for is possibly adding to a pool of technical debt if it's not set up correctly and the timelines aren't realistic. So with that, I mean, it was pretty easy to get to market, but I try to keep in mind now and for the last couple of years that you have to think about the implications of what might happen and the risks, technical debt risks that are involved. So,
thank you. And Joe, Eric, if I could just ask you, you guys have a lot of sort of customer-facing experience. I mean, could you look at these set of questions sort of through the lenses of expectation management? I mean, when you're meeting with somebody, you're consulting to them, you're advising them, you're managing their expectations, they may be coming in with a bunch of assumptions. I mean, in the context of whether they go SaaS, hybrid, on-prem, can you maybe talk to some specifics pulling from Nico's slide, as you look at content creation or delivery or whatever the components are?
Sure. Yeah, actually, I was going to say my first comment is be cautious, right? So the business stakeholders in the room, you definitely want to sync up with your IT organization, right? We used to always say you never get a second chance for a live event. And depending on who is the presenter at that live event, they do not want that event to fail. And there's so many layers and so many places where that live event can fail. So that's why we talk about requirements, and that's why we talk about making sure that there's a proper support model in place. We did talk about cloud today, and cloud has a lot of definitions. I think if we asked everybody to define cloud on the way out and leave a piece of paper, we'd get 52 different answers. Because there's a lot of folks out there will say, I'll just go, like a business person would say, I'll just go to this cloud provider. I'll go to On24 and they'll just stream the event. And that might work. It might work for the small event. But when number of viewers will definitely matter in a live situation, right? So, and that's when their IT people can be your friend. So understanding that network layer, understanding the integration into Active Directory if you want to have certain content available to certain people based on certain groups, that's where the management aspects of that platform is critical, right? Because you start to build a ton of content, and before you know it, you have hundreds or thousands of videos that either have to go end of life and have to be deleted, or can only be seen by certain groups of people. It's eating up storage. Who's paying for that, right? So there's all those elements that you want to be considerate of. So, I think the big message is no matter who you are in the organization. I saw hands go up for that are business folks, and you have your certain set of requirements. Everybody's got an IT person. You two have to work together and make this thing a success. Otherwise, it could be a disaster. Did I say that twice?
Yeah.
I've seen disasters, that's why.
Yeah, no, those are some great comments. And I would add some nuances to those. It's amazing to me some of the large customers that I work with that don't have a plan B. So I would add to that, have a plan B. And what I mean by a plan B is, we've been relying on this content delivery network for years. It's never gone down. And sure enough, I've actually had discussions with them where they're doing something really important, whether it's a live event or even if it's it's on demand, and things don't work, and then they lose their jobs, because that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to make sure that your content is always available. So have a plan B. What does a plan B mean? Go back. Always question what you have. Not to the point where you're paranoid, but question your infrastructure. Is this going to meet the needs today, tomorrow, and 2 years from now? And present that plan to your business holders. Because I think if you're proactive about that, if somebody's coming to you asking you for that business plan of how we're going to meet the needs of where we're going to grow the business over the next 2 years, and you don't have that in your hand, you should start worrying. Because a lot of times when we're brought in, that's exactly what's happened. They didn't plan. They had this big event. It was an election. They had content they needed to provide. They had a learning management system they were trying to launch. And they thought they were going to have 20,000 active users. They ended up having 300,000 active users, and it melted their servers. Their servers just crashed. And it was a complete disaster. So I would say that's number 2. Number 3, I would say always look for perfect versus correct. I think a lot of the, especially the IT managers that we work with, and even the business decision managers I work with, they struggle with, they want the perfect system. And of course, you have the limitations of budget and realities of time and resources and physics. So I'd say be careful with that one. I'd say the third thing I would say is look to always be adding value. So whatever you're going to build, whatever you're working on, doesn't matter what business you're in. I always ask somebody when they bring us in, we've got this problem, like, okay, we can solve this problem. We're going to do this. We'll put this on-prem stuff in the cloud. We'll get rid of these licensing problems. But at the same time, how are you adding value to what you're already doing? Oh, wow, I didn't think about adding value. Think about adding value. If you add value to it when you go back to your stakeholders. You say, I've solved the problem, but I've also now, we can stream this in 4 different protocols. We can do MPEG dash now. We didn't have that support. Or I've got high definition audio, which you didn't have as part of the video now, so that we can add that as a value add on when we're selling things. I'd say that number 3, and I would say number 4, test. Not the mic, test your stuff. Because I can't tell you how many times we've been brought in and say, well, we need a testing platform. We need a way to put this in the cloud and have, like for those technical folks in the room, Docker containers that allow us to spin up VMs. We can spin this stuff out. We can do really fine-grained testing on this stuff before it goes out to production. I see that over and over again. People make that mistake. So I would offer those 4 things.
I would also say invest in measuring too, because you can, and from an engineer's perspective, you can get a feature and be assigned a feature, and then not ask why you're doing that feature and just do it, and then move it to the done column in Youre, and then you move on to the next thing. But there should be an analyze column that you look at, and you figure out what you're improving, what you're doing in for the company, right? And then figure out how you're going to prove that worked, and provide yourself a reason for doing it, because that gives you motivation, to accomplish something. So
I think it's a great point, and that was what I was going to add to sort of the business case conversation, which is we see dozens and dozens of RFPs where the company's not that discriminating as to what is really, really important to them, what's nice to have, and it's almost like they didn't go through the exercise of saying, well, a really pretty interface or user interface would be nice, but we also want to scale to 40,000 live users, and it's like some of these things, if you're just checking boxes as a vendor, you may go into it thinking, I don't really know what this company wants to do. And I think it's an exercise that's important for everybody to do. Sit down and think what's most important to you. What is the business case? What do you want to accomplish? Is the content creation piece the most important? Is it using some legacy infrastructure, whether it's video conferencing, whether it's Skype for Business? Is it being able to scale internally? Is it being able to scale externally? I know if you put, hey, we need to charge for content, probably half the respondents drop out if you say that's dispositive. So going back to a pretty clear definition of enterprise video platform that works for your organization, it certainly doesn't have to fit a template, but to the extent you understand internally what the definition of success is, you can articulate that to a vendor. My sense is, having been in this industry a long time, vendors don't want to pull the wool over your eyes. I mean, they want good alignment, they want you to be successful, and they don't want to waste their time either, trying to respond to something where they're not a good fit. So, that business case that people have talked about, it'll provide value over and over and over again.
And I think that the key to that is a really clearly defined statement of work where the scope is agreed to by the business, the engineers, and everybody understands what they are to deliver on day one, phase one, whatever that is. And when that happens, the project, that phase is done. Because I think that there's a lot of scope creep that happens when we're deploying these solutions. Say, but that doesn't work exactly the way I thought it would. I want this to be a different color. Well, we can't do that. And you have to sort of become the negotiator or the beyond the project manager or the project manager's project manager and say, well, this is the end of the project. This is what we agreed to. Now, if you want there to be a phase two, that might be an expansion of service or an enhancement in the capabilities that were not covered in the statement of work. And having that clearly defined is going to save both the customer and the engineer. It's going to save a lot of time and, at the end of the day, money for just having an end. Because I think that's when scope creep happens and it starts lingering on and not having an end date. So to that end, I think it's really important to be realistic about your environment, have the statement of work clearly written, and when you're having scoping calls and doing the statement of work, don't include every business stakeholder on those calls. It needs to be the people who are relevant to the conversation who can make decisions, which is something that's happened across the board in every project where the project manager on the other side just wouldn't sign off because there was that one little requirement that wasn't met. And if you already agreed to it, then in some way, shape, or form, you have to deliver it. And that's really that's really how you get to the end of it. But I think it's more important to be really optimistic when you're going into these things and fixate on solutions and not problems. And I think that you can have a meeting of the minds, and there's some things that people can live with as long as they get the bulk of what you said you would deliver. But, and it's a contract, So you have to be prepared for that as a vendor or as an engineer or as a business owner. And if you didn't clearly define what your requirements were as the business owner, stakeholder, then, that could be interpreted and then that leaves room for not having the end of the project.
One other thing I would add, it's a great point, Nico, and it ties into what you said, is that it's still, it's interesting when I work with partners, one of the things that I always ask them is, do you know who you're trying to reach with this RFI or this RFP? Who are you intending to reach that you're not reaching? And about 50% of the time, just informal, like back at a napkin, they don't know. And so I've had to go back and, even if we win a proposal, we're working with a customer, I've had to go back and do this whole other discovery process with him. It's like a pre-RFP initiation phase. I don't even know what you call it, but it's like, you need to go tell me who you're trying to reach and why. Because you put out this, you're going to spend a lot of money on this system, and you have some of your consumption patterns, but you don't really tell us who you're trying to reach. We can't help you solve the best problem. So I'd say that's the other thing I would add to this is, you got to know who you're trying to reach and know your content consumption patterns, know what devices are coming in on, to have 2 or 3 years worth of trends to see where things are going, and that'll make you a lot more successful in your space.
So we actually had a couple more slides, and as we expected, we weren't going to get to everything. So I'd prefer to open it up to questions if there are any. A couple things. First of all, I'm supposed to repeat the question, so please remind me if I forget to, and keep the question short because I have short-term memory. And if there is a specific panelist, I've put the names back up there, that you would want to address the question to, please feel free to call out the name right there.
Yeah, I was just wondering, some of the slides you discussed third-party integrations. Is there any kind of, and I think every situation is going to be unique, but is there any one particular, 9 times out of 10, you might try and outsource it just because it's worked out consistently?
So I think the question is outsourcing a part of the solution where it requires a third-party integration into something that's already been deployed potentially on-premise.
Yeah,
Is
is there
that-
like any safe bets?
CDN.
Encoding.
Coding,
Oh.
CDN, transcoding,
Yeah.
that piece of it, depending on what the content is, for sure. But yeah, case-by-case basis.
Do you want to elaborate? Is there?
I would say encoding. I don't even know how to start encoding video. But yeah.
I think the other area where I've seen it's been helpful to outsource stuff is if you have folks that have, if you have content that's got a lot of metadata that's in SQL tables, and you're used to doing, it's a little bit technical, but if you're used to doing a lot of stored procedures, we've been able to help a lot of people that hadn't had a lot of experience, because when you do go to the cloud, it's more of a platform as a service solution. It's a little bit different technologies, and I've seen folks struggle and spend a lot of time working on those things, where if they just would have reached out and said, hey, look, we need somebody to come in and give us best practices on how to, we have all these procedures, all these queries that we're doing, how do we make this work in like Azure SQL or in S3, and you can save yourself a lot of time without spending a lot of money. You end up burning more resources than if you just went and said, look, you guys do this every day for a living. Don't be too proud, I should say, with something like that, because you can save yourself a lot of time just having somebody come in for a month and helping you guys out, get you bootstrapped to get you up in the cloud.
Yeah, what I typically also see outsourced is the production side, right? The event production is something that you can try to have your internal person be good at it, but production is a business in itself. Setting up the cameras, setting up the microphones, the audio, so there's no lip sync issues. That's something. Yeah, that's probably a typical thing you would outsource.
That's a fantastic point. We say that all the time, and sometimes you're just outsourcing accountability. You may have the internal resources, but risk, you don't want to be holding the bag.
Production value.
More of a, I guess, organizational logistics question. But in your experience, have you seen a separation as far as who owns the architecture versus who owns production?
Sure.
Or is
Oh,
it
yeah.
all IT? Or
Yeah,
And really quickly,
Yeah.
I got to do
Are you
my
gonna
little
repeat
job.
that?
Yeah, the question is.
You got to repeat the question.
In a typical organization, are you seeing a separation between production and IT and being in certain, I guess, different business units or different parts of the organizational chart?
I definitely do. In my cases, we typically see folks who have a design, build, run type function, and design, build sometimes being together. So those are the folks who are out there looking at all the different products, maybe doing an RFI, starting to do some POCs, talking with the network architects, security, the security team from security architecture, that perspective, and then handing it off with a proper handoff to the run team.
I think, Eric, to your earlier point,
Yeah.
It sounds like you're bridging those silos and
Absolutely.
forcing communication.
We see it all the time. In fact, there's some organizations, it depends on the security, it depends on your content, but I've seen some to the extremes where it's the same DevOps people doing both, to where it's completely separate teams and separate buildings, and they're not even allowed to talk to each other. They come together and they have a quick scrum. Okay, we're going to hand it off to you, and they run away, and the other guys go in and put it in production. It runs the gamut. It really depends on the security that you have and what you're really how sensitive the data is, because we've worked with folks where it's very sensitive data and folks where it's just, SpongeBob videos. Anybody can watch them. So it really depends, but the answer is absolutely.
And documentation. You said it before, documentation is key for that handoff, right?
Yeah, I think if you polled the people at this show who are in the production units, I mean, they come from everywhere. It's crazy. They're traditional broadcast, and they just got thrown into streaming because, video in one place is video in another place, and it's a fantastic group of people to get to know, and I've got to know a ton over the years from studio groups because, they come from being in bands to doing radio to doing traditional broadcasts to doing, movies, and somehow they find themselves talking about encoding and wowza and stuff like that one day, and they're driving webcasts that are sometimes bigger than some of the stuff they were doing in traditional broadcast and entertainment. So that's its own little story.
I think that although the original slide that we looked at where it's broken down sort of where I said business unit, owning each piece, obviously you have to work together, but the danger lies, especially if you're bringing in third-party products, is where the vendor will supply the product and they're the subject matter experts on how that product works, but your internal IT group would say, we have no idea how this product works, so we can't help you integrate it. And they say, we have no idea how your environment works, so we can't help you integrate it. And that's where that danger lies, and you have to be more of a renegade and a little bit of a con artist to get people to work together and to look at things like who's going to own this stuff once you throw it down. It's great. You have an ECDS, your company invested in your own internal content distribution network. Well, that's Cisco, and that's a network device. So is your network team going to run that and own that? Or are they going to expect you, the guy who runs the encoders, to be responsible for the CDN? So you want to make sure you're looking at those different layers in a realistic way and have people who are going to be your champions, who are going to help everybody take accountability and ownership when you bring it in. I think that's the biggest issue I've seen.
Thanks, Nicole. And any other questions? How about right here?
How do you make a good proof of concept investigating these technologies?
So the question is, how do you perform a good proof of concept when investigating these technologies? My sense is it probably depends on the specific layer in that stack. But Charles?
Yeah. So for us, everything is a Jira card. I don't know if anyone has Jira or knows about Jira, but
we all know Jira.
It's either it comes from us because we see the value in it, or it comes from a business owner, and we make sure that it's the task is fully documented and the timeline is realistic, and we just analyze it and do it. And then we'll do it maybe like a test environment, load test it, if that's where you're going down that path. It requires an investment from both sides. It requires our time, and it requires, kind of like, we're kind of going outside of the realm of what we're tasked with, right, and trying to figure something out and prove something. Mm-hmm. So you have to also measure what you're trying to prove. So you need to have the measurement set up and it needs to be like easily accessible. Because if you add blocks to that, no one's going to look at it. So make sure that what you're trying to prove has like, okay, this is what it looks like in this scenario, and if we add this is what it looks like in that scenario. Make sure that's set up first.
Do you guys generally do it via committee? So you have representation from different business units that are participating in a POC?
And like the requirements phase. You would get the requirements for what, what would constitute the success criteria, and then you kind of check them off as you go through the proof of concept in terms of integration. Was it easy to integrate? Did you experience any issues at the different levels of authentication or content distribution, whatever those criteria are? And then after, I hit the play button, it works, it passed. That's not generally how it works. But if you have just a good solid spreadsheet or a database, whatever you're going to build, that you can measure that with. And hopefully you'll make all the little red boxes turn green, and then you have a successful proof of concept and someone gets paid. That's how it works.
Whatever you can do to automate that measuring too. If you have beacons that you could send, if it's a web app or something like that, whatever. Like if you can automate that and visualize it like A and B next to each other, or in the same graph even.
I'd say as a vendor, keep them short and easy, pretty much.
Pie charts, colors, they like that. Keep everything green.
You got a question?
Hi, I'm with the U.S. courts, and I was curious of what your thoughts are about measuring success. Certainly analytics is available. We haven't done too much with surveys, but certainly the other thing that's always important to us, the videos that we're creating for whether it's the public or for judges and court staff, is it making any difference? Are they seeing quicker implementations on a national level? But I'm kind of curious, or are we trying to persuade Congress to give us additional resources? Do you have other ideas about maybe how you measure success?
So what are the most effective methods for measuring the success of content that's been created and broadcast out to an audience?
Yeah, wow.
That's
a good question.
Good time to ask that
It's a
question.
great question.
Time to
I mean,
availability.
a couple of short things are, you know, if you can evaluate the before and after. I mean, it sounds really simple, but it's I see it time and time again. Whether because we do a lot with state and local, you know, are their views increasing? Are the amount of time that they're spending on it? Of course, you got to have all this instrumented, but it's assuming that you did and you had before and after. Really, some of the stakeholders we work with is, are you able to see that the videos that, you know, are explain how to go get a permit for rebuilding your basement or whatever the case may be in the public sector is, are they being viewed more often? Are they being viewed on more devices? Are you getting less, and if it ties into other systems, are you getting less, you know, information and complaints about this in your, you know, in your CRM systems that you had before? So I think you have to take more of a holistic approach to it, especially if it's public sector oriented things. So it's not just one silver bullet that's going to give you, we're doing a better job. You kind of have to, I would pick three factors that you've had before or you've had pain points and evaluate those three things again after maybe you have your proof of concept out. Which again, one thing I want to add about that is, you know, typically we like to see proof of concepts, you know, spend 4 to 8 weeks on it. You know, if you go beyond 8 weeks, then you're turning it into an alpha or beta and you may end up wasting resources on it. So I'd say resist the urge to go past that 8-week time frame on a POC.
So I hate to do this because I know that you guys probably have Charles is gonna.
We're like,
I have to do this. We actually have to wrap up. We've gone a little bit past our limit, and I don't want to get everyone off track. But I'd like to thank the panelists. I'd invite you.
Thank you, Mike.
I've gone to them for questions in the past. You can get as technical as you want. I'd invite you to chase them down and ask them if people who didn't get to ask a question and still have some outstanding ones. And thank you for your attendance today. Really appreciate it.
thanks a lot, guys.